Good morning, church. It is Dave on the deck, and I am excited to be here on a beautiful, beautiful morning with sunshine. And hard to believe that it's already August 23rd, Sunday, August 23rd, which means summer is slipping away. But this may be one of the first summers in a long time when I'm more interested in next summer. I'm more interested in. I know that's not the right attitude, but this has been a crazy summer, no doubt. And I hope that you're all healthy, that you're all well, both physically and mentally. I just came back from a trip out in Maine with my family, and missing 2 weeks of connectedness. And goodness gracious, I didn't miss anything. I'm so refreshed from being away from the craziness that's kind of pumped towards us on television and on social media. Today, what I want to talk about is kind of the extended story from the Old Testament, the end of Joseph and the beginning of a time of Moses. And the theme today is this. It's called Get Out of the Water. And what I want to talk about is how God calls us to move, to change with changing times around us. Following his time-honored principles of life, God never changes. His principles never change. But for us, circumstances change, and we need to move sometimes. And I want to talk a little bit about the story and talk about some things that I just want you to think about as far as change and movement within your own life. I know when I was in high school, I had a great group of friends, but we were mainly focused on one thing. Well, I should say that we focused on two things. One thing was sports. Was whatever season it was, whether it was baseball season or wrestling season or soccer season, we were focused on sports and on training for sports and on talking about sports. Second thing, I guess, is probably girls, but that would be a whole nother sermon. But we were super interested. And we were a pretty good group of guys. You know, we horsed around a bit, but basically speaking, we're a pretty good group. And we had always gotten along well, and it was our senior year. And we were all 18 years old. And in Minnesota, when you're 18, when I was graduating in 1980, that was the legal drinking age. We really weren't much of drinkers, but we decided that for graduation, after we graduated, we were going to borrow a friend of ours' van, go to northern Minnesota, and drink a bunch of beer. This is our chance. We're legal, we're up north, we're no longer under sports, we're going to go up north. And I thought to myself, it doesn't sound very good. It doesn't sound very good to get that far away, to be drinking at a park, at a state park, to be out in nowhere. But these are my friends, right? So I got in the car and the van, I should say, and I went up north. We got up there, and I'll never forget the night that we decided to sit around the fire and drink beer. And things got a little hazier, things got a little fuzzier for all of us, and we were really, really hot. So we decided we were going to get in the van and just drive down the park road to the beach and swim, cool off a little bit. Lights should be going off in all of our heads, but they weren't going off in our heads. I was maybe thinking a little bit, maybe this isn't the best idea. We got in the van, and literally it was maybe a quarter of a mile at the most on a dirt road, and we started going out in the van, and next thing I know, the driver had gone into the ditch, and there was a big pole that stretched. It was a gate. It was kind of a big log that stretched across the road. And what had happened, the gate was open, and the front of the van hit the log. The log bumped up and went right through the front windshield, all the way through the van, and popped the back doors off this big van. Oh my goodness, I'll never forget the moment that we all sat calling out names for each other to make sure we were all okay. In fact, some of my friends were in the back laying down, and the pole had come within inches of their chest. Nobody was hurt, but man, we had a lot of explaining to do with the van and with the damage. It was a bonehead thing to do. It was a silly thing to do, something that's never been repeated. But I think about that time, and I think, it kind of came to my attention as we were planning for this that maybe I should not do this. Maybe I should move on to some other activity. And I don't know about you, but there are some times in life where the situation and the circumstances tell us quite clearly that it's time to move on, time to do something different, time to go a different direction. It might be a stretch for that story, but boy, I wished I had in that circumstance and was thankful that God had watched out for us that night. It's time sometimes for us to move on, and I think that we tend to wait too long when we're in a circumstance that's getting old or stale or getting bad. I think of athletes that keep playing and keep playing beyond their prime years. They just keep hanging on. I don't know if it's for a contract or for the applause. And things usually don't turn out very well when that athlete hangs on too long. I think about musicians that just keep playing. And it seems like the longer they play, the more, just the music gets ridiculous. And you hate to even listen to it anymore. It's embarrassing. They should have stopped when they were at their prime. I think about a lot of us in jobs. We just keep going. We just keep hanging on, even though we know it's time for us to move on. I don't know what we're hanging on to, maybe a paycheck. Sometimes relationships. Sometimes, and I'm not talking about marital relationships because we work through those. But sometimes we're in relationships with people, or when you're young, we're in dating relationships where it has ceased to be good. It has ceased to be edifying to you or them or God, and it's time for us to move on. We go to Exodus, the first chapter, and what we have is an Egypt that is about 68 years after the death of Joseph. Joseph, who had saved the country in 7 years of famine, had saved his family, had brought additional Jewish people into Egypt, and these people were around. And the chapter one of Exodus starts out saying that the government had changed, and they no longer knew who Joseph was. The people that trusted him, the people that honored him, were gone, and there was no recollection of who Joseph was. But there was this understanding and this vision that the Jewish people in Egypt are getting a little too big and a little too prosperous for the leaders' well-being. They looked and they said they keep growing in numbers and they're so prosperous. We need to do something different. Every time there's a new government, every time there's a new something, things are going to change. I remember being at camp and we would get a new fire marshal or a new camp inspector. And we were always a little bit nervous because each inspector had the things they looked at, and you were good at getting those things ready, but the new inspectors had different expectations. And there was oftentimes a period of time where you had to work things out, and it was difficult. Well, in Egypt, these prosperous Jews were growing and growing in numbers, and the Egyptians said, we need to nip this in the bud. We need to stop their growth. So they began to put pressure on the Jews, and then they began to really make them into slaves, giving them hard labor and hard work. And the interesting thing is that the Jews, rather than fight against this, they were more prosperous and they worked harder, and they were having more children, and they were more successful the harder the work that the Egyptians put on them, which probably scared them a little bit more. And the king of Egypt had gone to the midwives who delivered children for the Jews and said, what I want you to do is I want you to let the girls live, and I want you to take all of the males and I want you to kill them. I want you to kill them. And these midwives, probably wisely, went away and didn't do it. They didn't do it. And then you have this whole kingdom, this whole Egyptian landscape, which is set against the Jews, set against the Israelites. And the Israelites just keep on being more and more and more prosperous. And as we get towards the end of chapter 1 and into chapter 2, there's the story where many of us are familiar with, when a Jewish woman from the tribe of Levi has a baby, and she's afraid that this child is going to get taken or killed, so she puts him in a basket and puts him in the Nile River. And that child is to be found by the daughter of the Pharaoh, and she decides that she's going to keep him. And they get an Egyptian, or they get an Israelite, a Jewish woman to nurse him, his mother, and the story of Moses transforming the world has begun. You look at this time and you start to see in this story how change is a tool that God uses to grow his kingdom, to build his people. The change begins to happen in Egypt with a new government that doesn't know Joseph, and change begins to happen. Change begins to happen as the Jews no longer are free, but the Jews are now slaves. They're working hard, and they're prospered by God through their hard work. You've got the midwives who are asked to kill the children and decide not to. And God sees that and prospers them and grows them. In fact, they said that the midwives' families had more kids. Pretty interesting. Then you've got Pharaoh's daughter, who goes against what she's asked to do and makes a change and keeps Moses. And Moses is drawn out of the water. What his name means, drawn out of the water. Moses is drawn out of the water, and the world is changed by a child born in turmoil. Man, sometimes we need to see what the Bible says and recognize the importance and the value of moving on. In Romans 12, Paul says to us, he says, present your body as a living sacrifice. Present your body as a living sacrifice. You and I are called to give our lives as living sacrifices. And a sacrifice from Webster's dictionary would be this: surrendering something for the sake of something else. Surrendering, actually giving up. There's a cost. Giving up something for the sake of something else. As Christians, we are called to give up some of the things of the world for the sake of the kingdom of God. Give up some of our desires, some of what we think we need for the desires of God, which in the long term and short term are always better. We get comfortable, don't we? We get comfortable in our jobs. We get comfortable with friends. We get comfortable with our political positions. We get comfortable with foods that we like. We get comfortable, even though God has called us to constantly be looking how to adjust our lives to follow Him. I remember when I was in Africa with my brother, we were on this safari, and on the safari, we encountered a male lion, a huge male lion, just like you'd ever imagine a male lion to be. Except for this one was a little bit different because it was the mass migration of animals in Kenya on the Masai Mara. And this animal had been eating his fill day and night, probably for weeks. He was kind of covered with, he had blood on his face, and he had some in his mane, and he was just loping along. And we stopped in our Jeep almost next to him, and he walked, and he kind of bumped into the Jeep and just kept walking. And I thought to myself, here it is, king of the jungle, he's the lion, the most powerful animal. And he was just loping along, just loping along, just loping along. I think that lion had gotten comfortable. He wasn't the dangerous lion anymore. He was the fat and sassy lion. And I think we get fat and sassy. I get fat and sassy. I get comfortable. I like the comfort. I love going to Maine because I've been there before. I know where to go. I kick back, food. I love to be comfortable. But the Bible says, offer your body as a living sacrifice. We are called on to give up something for something else. We're called to give up our way of living. And one of the cool things I think in the Bible, when it talks to us about giving something up, when sacrificing, being a living sacrifice, Paul follows that up in Romans 12 by saying that we are not to conform to the ways of the world, but we are to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. You see, when we sacrifice for God, when we sacrifice to follow Him, we get the blessing of a renewed mind, of a mind that's kind of flushed out and continually learning and changing and growing and becoming new. Think about what happens to you when you're in a time of change. When you've moved someplace, you have a new job, you have a new relationship, you have a new child, you have a new whatever it is, you go on vacation in a new place, what happens to you? Change makes you reevaluate the things you do and the things around. Makes you look at it and go, is this still valuable? It helps you to adjust your life and to make a change here, make a change there, so that you can adjust yourself to the new circumstances you find yourself under. New things become things you love, things you may have never tried, people you may have never met suddenly come in as you are in this position where God is renewing your mind in a time of change and in a time of transition, and sometimes in a time of difficulty or in a time of virus. We learn things that we value more. We reach out, we find out the true nature of people that we've been hanging around with. We are renewed, even though sometimes that renewal feels hard at first. We learn so much during times of change. The Israelites, the Jews, could not have stayed in Egypt forever just being slaves, because the story of the world is written from that moment as they eventually follow Moses out into the promised land, and eventually we have Jesus, and everything is different from there on forward. God says to us through Paul, we are to be a living, present our bodies a living sacrifice, that we are not to be conformed to the world because it's comfortable and because it's easy, but be transformed by the renewal of our mind. And he doesn't say he's going to leave you alone. In Psalm 124, he says to us that along with the renewal of the mind, that he will be a constant help to us in the process. He will be a companion. He'll be an advisor. He will be a beacon, a light for us to follow in sometimes dark circumstances, dark situations. He teaches us so much about ourselves in times of change. You find out things that you're good at, things that you never knew, things you would have never tried, except for you're in this circumstance and in this time. You've turned down this road because it was a detour, and you find out it's the best road you could possibly ever go down. You go to a new place on vacation. You go to a new job. You care for people in new ways. You take on new challenges. I'm in this circumstance myself right now as I'm done with camp, as I'm working with the church now, but as I start on Monday a job at Grand Valley Student Ministries. I've always wanted to work with college kids. I've always wanted to work in a public university, and I'm going to be doing that on Monday. But I want you to know something. I'm scared to death. This might work out famously, or this change may be a real hard one that teaches me something else about myself. Maybe I'm not supposed to do that, right? But I'm going to follow God in this time period because I know that I need to give up something, this comfort of Northern Michigan perhaps, to do something else for God. And I trust Him that He's going to renew my mind. I'm trusting that He is going to teach me about myself. And I wish that for you as well. Doesn't mean it's always good. Doesn't mean it's always positive. But it is always beneficial for us in the long run when you follow God. And in the end, it's always, always, always better. God renewing your mind. A couple things I want you to think about this week. first thing I want you to think about is, are you stuck in ways that you do things, in thoughts that you have about situations and about people? Are you stuck? Do you need to try something new? Are you experiencing a renewal of your mind? What God promises those who follow him? Or has it been a long time since the cobwebs have been disturbed up there? Or your butt's been out of the chair? Has it been a long time? And I mean that more metaphorically. I'm not talking about sitting around. I'm talking about our souls sitting around. Ask God to show you areas that you need to change in, areas that you need to make a move in, areas where we need to go, and ask him to follow through on his promise, which he always will, 100% of the time. Follow through with his promise to renew your mind and to bring a joy and a peace to your heart. Ask God to show you that he is on your side. My freshman year in North Park, I had a roommate who had a strange pet, and that pet was a piranha. And it was a big piranha in this big tank, and we used to love to watch the piranha. And I've told this story at church before, but I love this because we made a bet as a group of guys in Solberg Hall at North Park University. We all put $1 in a jar, and we went out to the local pet store, and we bought a fish that we thought would survive the longest against the piranha. Me, I bought this like little fish that kind of sucked on the side of the tank so that it would, I thought it would be out of sight, out of mind, it'd be hiding out, it'd be a hard one to get, it would never, ever, ever get eaten. And sadly enough, there's all these variety of fish put in there. My fish was one of the first ones eaten. In fact, I think it was first or second fish, boom, gone. Couldn't believe it. And what we found is over time, the fish that lasted the longest were the fish that were swimming free, that were active, that were moving about. They must have kind of moved away and gotten out of the way, and the fish ate the bottom feeders and the slow fish. It is something about the movement and something about being out there in the tank that allowed them to survive. And I think about that, and I think about us. And sometimes I want to be a bottom feeder. Sometimes not bad things. I want to just kind of hunker down. I just want to relax. I just want to stay stable. But God is calling us to give that up, to sacrifice those comforts that we think are comforts for a renewal of the mind, for a new challenge and a new opportunity. And it doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be going out on the mission field. It can be small little changes, even just mental changes that change your perspective and the way you relate and react to people, and the way you react to God and his guidance in your life. My prayer for you is that you're healthy, that you are well, that this time of virus is not sinking you physically or mentally, but that it will renew your mind to the new things that you appreciate, and it will change you in a way that going forward, we as the church and as Christians become greater followers of Jesus, become disciples of a higher degree, because God needs us. He can do it by himself, but he's chosen to use us, and he will, each of us, regardless of our age. God bless. And this week, get out of the water, get out of the way, get into the middle of the tank, and get active for Jesus. Be changed. God bless. Have an amazing week. Amen.